This podcast is a Radio Mike original production. Head to radiomike.com.au to find out more. This episode of 20th Century Boy is brought to you by Radio Mike on Patreon. If the podcast leaves you wanting more, that's exactly what the Patreon is for. Head to patreon.com/Radio Mike and for as little as $1 a month, get access to the Overflow podcast, a bonus podcast every week that's up at the exact same time as 20th Century Boy. So cancel your Netflix subscription and use that money to support me on Patreon. Because to be honest, I need it way more than Netflix. Actually, that being said, Netflix membership numbers have been down, so they probably do need it, but also consider subscribing to the Patreon. The Patreon is overflowing with content. We'll see you there.
Oh, this is the worst day of my life.
The worst day of your life so far.
Show me a move. Good news, everyone. Don't you when you see onions?
Welcome to 20th Century Boy. My name is Radio Mike because I couldn't think of another name. And this is the inside of my mind. Oh, welcome back. Bloody welcome back. It is good to be back. I was back last week. It's good to be back again. Absolutely loved last week's ep and the feedback was incredible. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. Got a ripper show ahead of us today. And I hope you've been well. Shout out to all of you guys for listening to the show. Couple things just at the top that I wanted to briefly plug. By the way, my name's Radio Mike. This is 20th Century Boy, a podcast by me, Radio Mike, the guy from the title of the podcast. Just trying to make his way through life. Sometimes it's easier than other times. At the moment, it's fucking great. I am loving this life that I get to live at the moment as a young writer and producer. Not young anymore, actually. I'm nearly 30. And this podcast, it's the conversations you want to be having. That is the conceit of this whole podcast. The conversations you want to be having, or the conversations you wish you were having. And the reason I came up with that tagline for the podcast, by the way, is because throughout my whole life, what I realized was there were so many conversations I wanted to be having, but no one around me cared about them enough to want to have those conversations with me. So when I started this podcast and I was like, wow, this is like my blank canvas. I can talk about whatever I want. And it's just the conversations I want to be having. It's the conversations you want to be having. A weekly one-sided conversation with me, Radio Mike, the guy from the podcast. You don't get to respond to the conversation live. You can respond at any point through any of our socials. RadioMikePod@gmail.com, at TCBPod on Instagram, Radio.Mike on Instagram, at It's Radio Mike on Twitter. You know the drill. Anything you want to talk about, right into the show. It was great seeing all the feedback. Radio Aaron sent me a message on Insta. He said, welcome back, Mikey. New episode is a cracker. Missed you, mate. P.S. How do you feel about being called Mikey? And honestly, Radio Aaron, I love Mikey. I mean, I'm predominantly a Mike, but if you want to call me Mikey, I'll call you Mikey. I mean, you call me Mikey. I'm happy with Mikey, guys. That's the basic point. Patrio Koala, welcome to the radio family. One of the Patreon supporters of this show. He commented on the YouTube video, and just like that, one of the best podcasts to ever exist is back. So happy to see you returning. Thank you so much, Patrio Koala. Really appreciate that. And Radio Hugh this week. Welcome to the RF, Radio Hugh. Hey, Mike. This came through via email, by the way. Send anything into the show you want me to talk about or you want me to read. Hey, Mike, I know it's a little late, but I thought I should send this email before I forget. Glad the podcast is back, even if I may have found a better podcast. Incorrect. There are no better podcasts. This is the best podcast. Now, regarding last episode's segment, we do a segment on this show called Songs You Forgot Existed. It's funny that you mentioned Float On by Modest Mouse. That was the song that you forgot existed last week, sent in by a listener. Literally the night before the episode's release, I was playing the song to my dad to see if he knew whether the guitarist was using effects or playing harmonics, okay? Because I had no idea and my father is a guitarist. Apparently, the answer was effects, but regardless, loved the song, and while it was sitting in my like songs on Spotify, you could technically say that I had forgotten that it existed. My surprise when it came on while working out, although on the same token, it's not a song that I was very familiar with as a 20-year-old. Definitely will be listening to more Modest Mouse though, and would be surprised if anyone who grew up with the song had forgotten about it. I said that. I said no one would have forgotten this song. It's an absolute classic. It's an absolute banger. So thank you, Hugh, for writing in. Guys, of course, we are the only winnable podcast in the world. You can win this podcast. The way you win this podcast is if you're listening to this podcast right now, do a 360 on the spot. If you happen to see me in your vicinity, which is possible, and more people do and recognize me, right? If you're listening to the pod and you see me in your vicinity while listening to the pod, you've won the podcast. Come up to me and announce it now. You have won. Congratulations. So far, no one has won the podcast. So I just wanted to say that is still happening. And of course, as always, a few other things that I wanted to say. First of all, I'm trying to increase the output of podcast clips to just try and increase the reach of this pod. Had a banger with the Hungry Jack's rave from last week. Got nearly 20K. Got like 25K on TikTok. We used to do 3 a week. Going to try and do 4 or 5 a week. And I just wanted to put that out there. And I'm also putting extended clips on my main YouTube channel, Radio Mike. So if there's anything you want to check out, Radio Mike, YouTube, subscribe and everything there. And of course, patreon.com/Radio Mike, little as $1 a month. Subscribe to the Patreon. You get the Overflow podcast each week. I'm going to start doing baked in mid-roll promos for the Patreon now. So I won't do as much of a spiel up top, but as little as $1 a month, $12 a year. That's 3 coffees a year. Support the show. It's how we keep the lights on here because it does cost money to run this show. Guys, there's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I had to... If there's something I've been thinking about a lot, naturally, it makes its way in this podcast. I believe about a year ago on this pod, I mentioned that there's a phrase where it's like, this piqued my interest. And I always thought that, I talked about it on the pod, but I always thought that the term piqued my interest meant it was like peak as in a mountain peak, like P-E-A-K. And the reason I thought that was because it kind of made sense to me in my mind because it was like, it piqued my interest. Like this hit the top of my interest. Like it piqued my interest. Peak is the top of a mountain. It piqued my interest. Turns out it's its own word, P-I-Q-U-E-D, I think, peaked, which I never knew of. Well, I realized I've found another one of those kind of things that I just didn't understand. And it's kind of embarrassing, but I am interested to hear if anyone thought the same as me, because I think this is a very reasonable thing to come up with. I have only recently discovered and found out that the idiom or the phrase, you sound like a broken record, right? You sound like a broken record. If someone is saying the same thing over and over again and being annoying, you might say to them, you sound like a broken record. You might laugh at this. This might be embarrassing for me, but I had to come clean about this. For most of my life until very recently, I thought that saying meant you sound like a broken record, as in, I'm just going to say it, as in you are breaking the record for the most times someone has said this thing. As in you're like breaking a Guinness Book of World Records record and you sound like a broken record, like you're breaking the record of saying that thing that you're saying that's annoying. Literally only recently discovered that it actually means you sound like a broken record, as in a vinyl record, a music album record. And sometimes if the record's broken, the needle can get stuck and it just plays the same thing over and over and gets into like a 3-second loop. That's what the saying you sound like a broken record means. Here I am over here thinking there's a guy coming in from the Guinness Book of World Records and that the idea is like you sound like a broken record. You're breaking the record. Idiot. And this is my life. This is how and imagine, just imagine my shock and my confusion and my questioning of the entire reality that I've grown up in. when I find out that broken record refers to literally a record, not a record as in a Guinness Book of World Records record. I had to get that out there. I think we should continue with the show before I cause myself any more embarrassment. Huge moment on last week's pod. If you were listening to last week's pod, I did quite an impassioned little rave about my boy, Frankie Muniz.
You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss.
Frankie Muniz, as I said, he's a legend. He's my hero growing up, and cut that up into a rave, and I popped it up on all the relevant channels. I put it on Insta, I put it on TikTok, I put it on Twitter, everywhere I post clips, YouTube. And, didn't make too much of it. It did okay, and I went to sleep and woke up the next morning to an enormous amount of notifications on my Twitter. I open Twitter, I look it up, and what do I discover?
You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss.
Frankie Muniz, aka Malcolm from Malcolm in the Middle, aka Agent Cody Banks, aka Jason Shepard from Big Fat Liar. Frankie Muniz has liked and retweeted my tweet about him.
You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss.
It was possibly one of the greatest days of my life, realizing that my childhood hero had seen me impassionately talking about how much I loved and respected him, seen it, liked it, and then reposted it to his own account. Didn't gain any followers, but Frankie Muniz retweeted me. The real Frankie Muniz retweeted me. I'm loving the idea. I am genuinely loving the idea that Frankie Muniz, a kid that I have watched on TV my whole life, as a kid especially, is sitting at his house, wherever he lives. He's sitting there, maybe he's doing a poo, maybe he's scrolling his phone while watching reruns of Malcolm in the Middle, maybe he's lying in bed, maybe he is counting his millions and millions of dollars while swiping through Twitter, and he sees himself tagged in my video and watches it and thinks this is funny and so real about me. I love this. I want everyone to see what this kid from Melbourne has said about me. Frankie Muniz, thank you for retweeting me. For one, I really appreciate it. And it was awesome. But Frankie, now that you know I exist, and of course I know that you exist, I have for a long time, I'm new to your life. I understand that I am new to you. You are not new to me. I have known you for a very long time. But hi, I'm Mike. Hello, Frankie. My name is Mike. I'm from Australia. I'm from Melbourne. I do a little podcast here. I'm a podcast producer. That's my job, but I do my own little podcast for fun. And Frankie, I know you're seeing this because I know you see things that people tag you in on Twitter, and that's exactly what I'm going to do with this clip. Frankie, I would like to warmly invite you to be a guest on my podcast. Bam.
You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss.
I want you to come on this podcast and I want to interview you. I know what you're thinking. Why should I go on this Australian Kids podcast? Why would I care? Why would I want to do that? I'm busy. I was on Malcolm in the Middle. I've got other stuff to do. Frankie, I know everything about your career. I love you, man. I grew up idolizing you. Big Fat Liar, one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. Worse, we've got cats eating cats and we've got fish eating fish. That's a quote from your movie, Big Fat Liar. Agent Cody Banks, you kissed Hilary Duff. Everyone was jealous. In the second one, you kissed that girl on the cheek at the end. Destination London. Amazing film. Lily Allen's brother in that movie sings War while you guys are doing all your secret agent stuff. It's an amazing film. I've seen every episode of Malcolm in the Middle. I love you in it. I think you're great. I also know that you briefly voiced Chester in the Fairly Odd Parents cartoon, very, very briefly, and you did a great job at that, and I used to love your little cameos. And Frankie, I've seen one of your most underrated films, and I believe it was a film you were in before Malcolm in the Middle, and it was called My Dog Skip. And you were like a cute 8-year-old boy with a dog, and that movie was incredible. Frankie, I love you, man. And I want you to come on my podcast and I want to interview you. This is my appeal to you. And listeners, if you are listening to this and you have Twitter, I want you to tag at Frankie Muniz. You need to go on It's Radio Mike's podcast. Frankie, I'm setting this as a goal for my life. I want to speak to you. Again, I know that you just found out I exist, but I know that you exist. I will do anything for you to come on my podcast for an interview, Frankie. Thank you for retweeting me, and I look forward to hearing from you or your people. I'm just a one-man band here, so I don't have people. Tell your people to get in contact with me. It's relatively easy. Frankie, this is a mission of the show. Speaking of goals of the show and missions of the show, guys, and also it would be fucking amazing if Frankie Muniz came on this show. I really hope he does. I was speaking directly to Frankie there. So guys, get around it. Let's get Frankie on the show. Also, another random Twitter thing that happened, and this is only cool for me. I did a tweet on Twitter that was just like, it was just a joke that was people who get 100 likes on their Twitter posts, how? And then no one will think this is cool except for me. The voice actor, and I've never contacted this person. I follow them on Twitter, but they obviously don't follow me. But the voice actor who was the voice actor who played the character Ty, the main character in the children's cartoon series Digimon from the 90s, replied to my tweet with a joke. So somehow this week, I have wound it up in the Twitter feeds of two people who portrayed characters that I loved as a child. Ty was the kid. I've actually got a pop vinyl of him here. A rare Thai pop vinyl. He's this kid, and you'll probably recognize him. He has goggles, and he has like long, shaggy brown hair. Classic kind of anime trope character, but that's him there for video viewers. And the voice actor of him just replied to one of my tweets, which I thought was incredibly strange, and I didn't really know how I ended up on his feed, but it was very cool. And then I tweeted at him being like, I think I just said, please come on my podcast. But anyway, speaking of long-term goals on this show, I did announce last week that it was a soft reboot of the show, and many of the goals that I have had on the show over the years may or may not happen from here on out. That is because some of them I realized were unfeasible, some of them I just couldn't be bothered doing and were unrealistic. So you may or may not see a lot of the goals. I did, however, in light of recent events, I did, however, want to do a little segment that hasn't been done since the start of the year, and that's because I kind of forgot about it / gave up on it. So here it is. Radio Mike's Lord of the Rings update. But isn't he like only into Harry Potter? No. It is my Lord of the Rings update. I went a little bit viral earlier in the year, or maybe last year, because I've never seen Lord of the Rings and I've never read the books. Well, now I have, because my goal was by the end of the year to read the Lord of the Rings books and watch the movies. I have read the first Lord of the Rings book, and I've also watched the first Lord of the Rings movie, and I am halfway through the Two Towers book. And I have been halfway through the Two Towers book, which is the second Lord of the Rings, by the way. I have been halfway through that for about 6 months. Because as I said originally when I was talking about the first book, the Lord of the Rings books are the densest books I've ever read in my life, and they're very difficult to read. So I kind of gave up. I was listening to an audiobook. Maybe I have to pick that back up, because I actually was enjoying the Two Towers. I met Treebeard, who was like the big talking tree, I think. That was cool. And it's all fun, and I'm into that kind of thing. And maybe I do still want to watch Lord of the Rings by the end of the year, but anyway, I digress. The reason I wanted to talk about this today is because I noticed there's 2 new TV series out this week, or like in the last few weeks. One of which is House of the Dragon, a Game of Thrones story or whatever it is, and one of them is The Rings of Power, the Lord of the Rings prequel. Both of these are prequel series, and it really got me thinking. We currently have an obsession with prequels. I just feel like there is a prequel pandemic going on at the moment in Hollywood and just in the general media landscape. Like we're just obsessed with what happened before. We just have to always think about prequels and what happened before. And I'm not saying prequels are bad. I'm just curious as to why prequels have entered the mainstream zeitgeist in terms of pop culture. It really is creativity just taking a step back. It's like, who's a successful character and how can we make a story that's like, how did they get to this? And we've seen it 1,000 times before. Better Call Saul recently wrapped up, prequel to Breaking Bad, starring arguably the breakout character from that series, Saul Goodman. Good series, bit of fun. How did Saul Goodman become Saul Goodman, the criminal lawyer that he was in Breaking Bad? Fun, I get it. I totally get it. Of course, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones are currently doing prequel series, as I mentioned. And then heaps of others. Star Wars had the prequel series, then they made Han Solo, the Star Wars story spin-off movie about how Han Solo became Han Solo. Turns out his name was just Han, he didn't have a surname, but he was traveling by himself, so he called himself Han Solo. That actually happens in the movie. That's the origin of the name Han Solo. Prequels, they're really interesting. We've got Harry Potter prequels with the Fantastic Beasts series. They just put out a prequel to Predator called Prey, which is set like years and years before the original Predator movie. We love prequels. We love finding out how characters ended up being the way they were. And it's just like, it's just, the thing with prequels is, I have never once thought to myself in my life, I wonder how Cruella from 101 Dalmatians became the woman she was in that film. I wonder how Cruella, the fictional woman from the fictional Disney movie about 101 Dalmatians, became the woman she was. I've never thought that in my life, but Disney still made a movie about it. They still made a movie about that. And it's just like, where does this end? Surely there are some characters that don't need prequel spin-offs. Surely Cruella was one of those characters. I'm not joking. I am genuinely preparing and would be completely unsurprised if the next big prequel was literally something like, you all know Big Bird from Sesame Street, but he wasn't always the friendly neighborhood bird he is today. Here's Big Bird. Here's the Big Bird prequel where Big Bird grew up in a slum and used to give hand jobs for crack on the street, and how he eventually got out of that life and made it to Sesame Street. Seriously, I would not be surprised if we got a Big Bird prequel that's like the dark and gritty origin story of Big Bird. And it would be called Little Bird because it would be when he was a child, so he wouldn't be big yet. So he starts as Little Bird. And he gets to Sesame Street and it's like, now I'm Big Bird and I've learned a lot. There you go. I've just written half the movie for you, Disney or whoever owns Big Bird. Side note, Big Bird as a character is just so funny. He's just such a lanky, weird bird. You'd love to meet him. Anyway, so Lord of the Rings, I am going to try and finish the Two Towers audiobook by the end of the year. And then I will also disclaim, I read another goal, a reading goal of the show was to finish the Pilkey bibliography, which is Dav Pilkey, creator of Captain Underpants. I did read one of the Captain Underpants books, like last week, Captain Underpants and the Tyrannical Return of the Turbo Toilet 2000, which I believe is the second last book in the revered Captain Underpants franchise. So I think the last book in the franchise that I have to read is Captain Underpants and the Sensational Saga of Sir Stinks-a-Lot, which sounds hysterical if you ask me. So, some of the goals might still happen, some might not. If you like everything that I do here on 20th Century Boy and you get to the end of the podcast and want a little bit more, head to the Patreon, patreon.com/Radio Mike, and for as little as $1 a month, that's $12 a year, that's buying me 3 coffees a year if you can spare it, you get access to the bonus podcast, the TCB Overflow. Bonus content every single week and stuff I would never talk about on the main podcast. This week I am doing a full review of Frankie Muniz's entire filmography, and I'm also going to tell a story about a time that I went skinny dipping. If you want that, head over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Radio Mike. It really helps support the show, and we can use all the support we can get if you like the show. So please jump on. If everyone gave as little as $1 a month, then this show would be capable of doing so much more. So please consider it and help support me, one of the little guys in podcasting. All right, back to the show. I'm really late to the party at the moment. I have been binge watching The Office, the US version of The Office for the first time. I've never seen it before. I don't know why I missed it. I don't know how I missed it, but I've been binge watching it. I'm up to the end of season 3. And guys, I'm not going to sound like a broken record here, but I'm obsessed with The Office. It has taken over my entire life, and I'm fine with that. I'm actually addicted to it. I'm watching like 3 or 4 episodes a day, and it's just like the most fun I've had with a TV show in a long time. I actually don't remember the last time I binge watched a show. Like, I watch more movies generally, but it's just such an easy show to put on and watch, and it's hilarious. And I know lots of people, when last year I was talking about the best ever sitcoms, The Office came up a lot, and I was really shocked because I'd never seen it. Everything about this show is incredible, and I'm now going to spend at least 5 minutes talking about why I think The Office is one of the best shows ever, even though I'm literally 20 years late to the party and everyone has already seen it. I actually caught up with my friend Zach. People may remember Zach. He's appeared on the show a couple times. And he just recently started watching The Office as well. So we were both just talking to each other all night about how genius The Office is. And we must have sounded like such wankers to anyone who actually watched the show when it was on, because he was like, yeah, like, it's the best show ever. It's like everyone's worked in an office, man, so it's so relatable, and all the characters are just so relatable, and you know a Stanley, you know an Angela, you know a Michael Scott, you know a Dwight. We were just saying all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure that discourse about the TV show The Office has happened many times with many people over the last 20 years of it existing, but we're just getting to that now, and it was kind of funny. It is such a good show, though. I mean, the things that I think make The Office such a good show, one, as I already said, the authenticity of it. Most of the actors are just really ordinary looking people. They don't look like superstar attractive, really actors. Like, you look at the cast of Friends, for example, and they're all young, attractive people. But all of the characters in The Office, and there's layers of characters. There's like the main characters, then sort of the sub characters, and then there's like the even like lesser seen people in The Office, but they're all there every episode, which makes it feel so real. Plus, the piece to camera bits are just incredibly exposing, and I love that so much. Michael Scott is one of the best characters ever written, ever. He's just nuances and lack of awareness for what he's saying and why it's offensive are like rivaled only by someone like Mr. G in the same genre, like in the mockumentary genre. Mr. G from Summer Heights High is just totally oblivious to how offensive the things that he's saying are, and just says whatever's on his mind and doesn't realize that anyone could possibly be offended by them. That's Michael Scott, and I love his character so much. Jim and Pam are just such an incredible pairing. The chemistry between them is amazing, and you just love them. And everyone's had a crush on someone in The Office, so we all know that feeling. And just the general narrative of it is pretty fun. Like, there's a sort of a storyline that runs through the whole series. It is just incredible. It is so laugh out loud funny, and it's so wrong, like not wrong, but I guess it's like how people would say now it's not politically correct, but I guess like I really like it because, and this is sort of where I think people sometimes seem to struggle to distinguish, even though at least to me it's really obvious. It's like when the character Michael Scott, played by Steve Carell, I mean, I'm sure everyone who listens to this pod is on the same page, but when the character Michael Scott, played by Steve Carell, says something that's like really low-key racist or sexist or really homophobic or something, you're not laughing at the content of what he's saying. You're laughing at the ignorance of the character. You're laughing at him for thinking that it could possibly be okay to say something so ludicrous and offensive in a public place. And it's the same with Mr. G. When Mr. G is playing Thank God You're Here with his drama students in class, and the first thing he says is, "Thank God you're here, grandma's been raped." Like, you're not laughing at the idea of that happening, which is horrible. You're laughing at the fact that a teacher, a grown man who is teaching young students in like year 9 and is playing Thank God You're Here with them. Okay, that's an improvisational game, great for a drama class. And thinking that that is an appropriate scenario to bring a 15-year-old child in to improvise with. That is what is funny about it. And I think now in comedy, we miss the line a bit now, where people just think any depiction of anyone saying something that's mildly offensive is offensive. Like that just the fact that there is a character saying it is automatically offensive. It's not, and it can't be funny. It's like, it's not, they don't see it as, what I see it as is this is a reflection of this character and this person and who this person is and what they think and what they say. And with the character Michael Scott, it just resonates so hard with everything he is, which is like a really insecure dude who doesn't really have any social standards and has tumbled his way to the top of this business and is just like a terrible person, an inconsiderate person, but just doesn't know it, right? And you're laughing at all of that. You're not laughing at the content of what he says. Like in the episode where they're doing the basketball game and he's choosing a team for his basketball game that they're going to play in the warehouse, and he goes up to Stanley, the only African-American person in the office, and goes, "Stanley, clearly on my team." And then Stanley goes, "Why clearly?" And watching Michael try to dig himself out of the hole of this, he not even realizing that he's being subtly racist. That's what's funny. It's not we're laughing at racism. It's we're laughing at the idea that someone thought that was an appropriate thing to say. It's like you can't believe it. And I think mockumentary, the format of mockumentary really allows for that. Like I think it really allows us to see through these characters and see the layers to them, because it's kind of like a cheat code, because in mockumentary, the characters can essentially speak directly to the viewers by, doing these piece to cameras. And that's them saying, the juxtaposition in The Office of what they're saying to the cameras and then the reality where they're being caught fly on the wall by the documentary crew is what makes it so funny. So I've been really enjoying The Office. If anyone has anything they would want to talk about The Office or write it in, all the socials, they're all in the description. Write it in. I would love to talk more about The Office on this show. I'm enjoying it so much. So that's been the main thing I've been kind of binging. There's a man on this show that we need to talk about. You all know where this is going. I want to briefly talk about my favorite person in the world. His name is Sean Kingston. Sean Kingston is one of the heroes of this podcast. Frankie Muniz is also up there. But Sean Kingston, creator of the fantastic song from the mid-2000s, several fantastic songs, predominantly Beautiful Girls.
It was back in 99, watching movies all the time, ooh, and I went away for doing my first crime.
And of course, Me Love, the song that I consider one of the most underrated songs in the world and one of the greatest songs ever written. Why'd you have to go away from home? Me Love, great song, incredible song. We celebrate Sean Kingston on this podcast a lot, but something damning has caught my attention this week. It came in from Radio Michael Lay. Welcome to the radio family, Radio Michael Lay. Now, over the years of this podcast, we have constantly supported Sean Kingston, even though many of his songs contain lyrics that are questionable or also infeasible or impossible. For example, the grab I just played from the song Beautiful Girls, "You're way too beautiful girls," if you don't know the song. Thanks, I've got a great singing voice. That grab, I'll just play it again for you. Take a listen to the lyrics.
It was back in 99, watching movies all the time. Ooh, and I went away for doing my first crime.
So it was back in 99 watching movies all the time when I went away for doing my first crime. I question this because, and if you're a long-term listener of the show, you'll be familiar with this, but I believe our boy Sean Kingston, right? Our boy Sean Kingston was born, he was born in 1990. So he's saying that in 1999, he was watching movies all the time and then he went away for doing his first crime. One of our listeners, Radio Alex Sky, listener of the show, he did some research into this and he found in Sean Kingston's hometown, he was born in Miami, Florida. He's Jamaican, but he was born in Miami, right? In his hometown of Miami, you actually cannot go to jail or any juvenile detention facility until you're 12. Bang. So Sean Kingston does lie in his song. It is not actually legally possible that he could have gone away for doing his first crime back in 1999 when he was watching movies all the time. And we do have to unpack that because what this tells us is even though Sean Kingston is a musical prodigy, he is in fact not trustworthy. Which brings me to my next point. He's also a bad lyricist. We know this from the lyrics of his song Eeny Meeny featuring Justin Bieber, which start with quite possibly one of the worst and most tautological lyrics of all time.
She's indecisive. She can't decide.
She's indecisive. She can't decide, which is literally what indecisive means. So what this tells us is, again, even though Sean Kingston is one of the greatest musicians of his time, he's not trustworthy and he's also a bad lyricist. Last week, I can't remember who wrote this in, but welcome to the radio family, to whoever it was that wrote this one in. We found that Sean Kingston actually guested on an episode of the Disney Channel original series, The Sweet Life on Deck with Zach and Cody. I believe the year that episode came out was 2010. This is 3 years after Sean Kingston's breakout hits, Beautiful Girl, and to a lesser extent, for an unknown reason, because it's a much better song, Me Love. I said I would watch that episode of The Sweet Life on Deck. I would. Nothing to write home about. Sean Kingston jumps on this cruise that Zach and Cody are on. He wants to impress a girl. They throw a surprise party for the girl. A bunch of stuff happens. But at the end of the episode, we are graced with a song by Sean Kingston that I didn't know existed, which does bring into question that this is probably why they got him on The Sweet Life with Zach and Cody, because they knew they wanted to get this song out there. I assume with the huge success of Beautiful Girls, and to a lesser extent Me Love, which is a better song but not as commercially successful, I assume 3 years later, Sean Kingston's trajectory was a bit down. So how do we boost it? Get him on Disney Channel. Sean Kingston had another song called Dumb Love. And boy, oh boy, if we were talking about Sean Kingston being a bad lyricist, this puts the icing on the cake.
Girl, you make me dumb, 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 be doobie, dumb, 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 dumb. I love you so.
Dumb, 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 dumby doobie, which, not sure if intentional, but a doobie is often what you refer to as a joint. a doobie. And then I'm pretty sure at the end he actually, this is the start of the song that I just played, by the way. I'm pretty sure he then goes, I love this song.
Girl, you make me dumb, 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 be doobie, dumb, 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 dumb. I love you so.
So he's like 5 seconds into his own song, and in a bout of insecurity, Sean Kingston thinks, how do I make sure people love this song? And he decides, I'm just going to put the lyrics, I love this song, within the first 5 seconds of the song. So when you're listening to the song, it's subliminally, well, not even subliminally, it's superliminally telling you that you love the song.
Girl, you make me dumb, 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 be doobie, dumb, 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 dumb. I love you so.
Anyway, moving forward, because I've digressed a bit, but Radio Michael Lay again sent this in on the YouTube. He said, Mike, and the thing about this is Radio Michael Lay has been a long-term listener of the show, so he's heard all of the stuff I've done with Me Love, the song, but this is the first time he's written this in. Mike, if you like that song, you may also enjoy Dear Maker by Led Zeppelin. My curiosity peaked here. And when I say peaked, I mean peaked like the top of a mountain, because it was the highest form of curiosity. And very fascinating stuff, but also very damning stuff, because we love Sean Kingston and we hate to see him get into trouble. Of course, you know Me Love, because it's the greatest song ever written. Why'd you have to go away from home? Me love, right? We all know it. Take a listen to Dear Maker by Led Zeppelin. I think you'll be shockingly surprised. See if this piques your interest. I'm sorry. Did Led Zeppelin get ripped off by Sean Kingston? Because I didn't know this, but Me Love, aka the best song in the world, is a rip-off of Dear Maker by Led Zeppelin. Sorry, guys, I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but I don't know. That just really shocked me. Now, I ended up looking on the Wikipedia page for Me Love, and it does say the song samples Dear Maker by Led Zeppelin, which I've never seen before, because I feel like I would have looked it up if I knew that, but I never have, and this took me by huge surprise. And Dear Maker by Led Zeppelin, the name Dear Maker is supposed to sound like Jamaica in a British accent. Dear Maker, right? And Sean Kingston is Jamaican. This is a next level conspiracy. And now I'm left wondering if Me Love is the best song of all time, in my opinion, does that mean that I have to think that Dear Maker is the best song of all time as well? Then I realized it's actually not the first time Sean Kingston has ripped off another song. Beautiful Girls.
It was back in 99, watching movies all the time.
Yes, you heard that right. I can't believe I didn't even notice this. It's Stand By Me.
So darling, stand.
Listen to that bass line.
It was back in 99, watching movies all the time. So darling, stand by me.
It's crazy. Again, I'm left wondering, did Sean Kingston ever write an original song? But then the more I think about that, and the more this piques my interest, I just start realizing that this entire Sean Kingston thing is just a little bit.
Dum 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 be dooby dum 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 dum. I love you so.
And that's me realizing when he says, I love this song, that's me again realizing that Me Love is my favorite song. Okay, we've got a little bit more time. So I got to do one more quick thing I noticed. Because when you do a podcast, the thing about when you do a podcast is, you know, your podcast starts to hit a stride. You get a certain amount of listeners. You get a certain amount of people talking about your show. And then your show starts sort of permeating in other areas of pop culture. And, you know, I think my show has reached that. People start talking about the show, you know, people with real jobs, real lives, people just start knowing your show and people recognize you, whatever. It's all a byproduct of what I want to do, which is create fantastic art. But as we all know, there's a rule on this show. It's probably the main rule of this show and of life, and that is don't block the MDF. It all originates from like when I was at university and I worked a part-time job at Dan Murphy's in Kew, and there was behind the main register, there was a grey box, like a box attached to the wall, and on the box, written in Texter, like in Sharpie, was just "Don't block the MDF." Words to live by. Now that's become a recurring meme on our show. And I realized that this podcast clearly is starting to permeate pop culture because I was watching my favourite show the other night, The Chase Australia, on Channel 7, 5 to 6 p.m. every night. It's the best trivia show on television. Why? Because it's just got the most trivia questions. I finish a long day of work, and at the end of the day, I come home, all I want to do is do trivia questions in front of the TV. I don't watch Millionaire Hot Seat with Eddie Maguire because there's not enough questions. Sorry, Eddie. Not enough trivia questions on that show. Chase Australia, it's rapid fire trivia. You're answering probably 100 to 200 questions every night. Millionaire Hot Seat, you're probably answering 5 to 10 questions the whole show, right? That's why I watch The Chase Australia, okay? I love trivia, and it is my favourite show on television. People always ask me, Mike, you watching any good shows at the moment? I'm just like, I'm binge watching The Chase Australia. It's the best show on TV. It's just trivia. It's awesome. See, if you're not watching The Chase Australia, watch it. I also, on a side note, there's a chaser on the Chase Australia called Super Nerd. I want to challenge him because I think I'm both nerdier than him and more lovable than him. But that's another tangent. I was watching The Chase Australia, and to my delight, I'm going to play... this is just... Imagine being me. You're sitting in front of the TV doing your trivia at the end of a long day of work. And we're in one of the Cash Builder trivia rounds for anyone familiar with the Chase Australia. It's 60 seconds and just pure trivia, and the people get $200 per correct answer. Take a listen to this couple string of questions. The last question, I think, will fascinate you.
The computer HAL 9000 first appears in which Kubrick film?
Pass.
2001 A Space Odyssey. The Great Barrier Reef lies off the east coast of which Australian state?
Queensland.
Correct. The telecommunications abbreviation MDF stands for Main Distribution what?
Pass.
Frame.
That guy didn't know the answer, but I was just, it's like worlds colliding. I'm watching my favourite show and a reference to my podcast comes up. Is it too far-fetched to say, is it possible that there is a writer on the Chase Australia writing questions who listens to this podcast? Miles from the TikTok 10, who was on an episode of this podcast a few weeks ago, I don't think he listens to my podcast, but he does write for the Chase Australia. So maybe I should ask him. Maybe that's what I'll do next week. I'll ask Miles, is there anyone on the Chase Australia, that writing team that you think listens to my podcast that might have put that question in? Anyway, guys, I want to end the show with one of our favourite segments that we do here. It's time for another song you might have forgotten existed. This one is chosen by me. And with all this talk about Sean Kingston, I I kind of went back to that era, and similar vibe on this one. Okay, so again, songs you forgot existed. It's songs that when you hear this song that I'm going to play, the reaction you want is like, oh yeah, right? It's not, people get confused about song you forgot existed, but it's like you hear it and you're like, oh yeah. It's not you forgot the song, because you can hear this song and instantly the memories flood on back to you, right? It's a song you forgot existed until now. Take a listen to this one and let me know what you think. All right, everybody, it's time for another one of these bad boys. Songs that you forgot existed. This week, it's a Mike submitted one, and I 99% guarantee you forgot that this song existed. Play it for me, Mike. No worries.
Shawty's like a melody in my head that I can't keep out. Got me singing like na 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 every day's like my iPod stuck on replay. Shawty's like a melody.
That's right, it's Replay by Ayaz, a song that mentions iPods. Did you forget it existed? That's actually funny, because I also realized that leans into the whole broken record theme that I've been referencing back to, sounding like a broken record, referencing back to it constantly, but like iPod stuck in replay, bit of a broken record, right? Yeah, that song's so interesting because, one, I couldn't even remember the name of the artist, and apparently it's Ayaz, which I was like, what? His name is Ayaz? What the fuck? And then it's funny because the whole song is about iPods, like my iPod stuck on replay, and that's such a dated, it's a song of its time. I reckon there's people listening to this podcast who probably don't even know what an iPod is. And if you're one of those people, good for you. Let's wrap up the show by doing this bad boy. The plug. Get in touch with anything you've liked about this week's show. I'm going to start doing these again. Question of the week, and I'll put it up on my Instagram, which you can reply to as well, or just email in. Here's what I want to know for next week. What's the best prequel? What is the best prequel of anything you've seen? What do you think is the best prequel, best story? You know, and even pitch your own prequel. I pitched Little Bird, the slummy beginnings of Big Bird on Sesame Street. Pitch your own, but also what's the best prequel? Can be in any medium. Movie, TV, video game. Let me know. Best experience with a prequel. In terms of plugs, I wanted to plug the podcast hotline. Let's get some calls in, guys.
If you've got a contribution to the podcast, there's only one number you see. Go 1-800-438-353.
And aside from that, Harry Potter and the Boys is back. I will stand by this. I think it's the funniest thing that I do. So if you think this pod is funny, but even if you don't like Harry Potter, I think you'll like Harry Potter and the Boys. It's barely about Harry Potter. It's my Harry Potter fan fiction that I wrote when I was 13 years old. It is absolutely ludicrous. We're currently in chapter 20 of book 2, where we meet Farks the Phoenix, not Forks the Phoenix, Farks the Phoenix. Sammy Garlep joined me again, and it was a hilarious episode to come back to. Here's a little sneak peek.
They were made to sit in a holding area of the office while Harry and the Sorting Hat were ushered into a heated meeting with Cheeseman Damo. An HR representative from the school. Cheeseman Damo is the HR at Hogwarts.
So yes, Cheeseman Damo, I love that. There are so many funny character names that 13-year-old Mike came up with in that. Fuckster Fungorious was one. Dylan Dildo Dilderoni was another one. So there's lots of great moments in there. If you just want a bit of 13-year-old potty humor and then me and Sam critically analyzing the writing, it's a great pod. I would love for you to check it out. I also popped up on this week's episode of 2 Guys, 1 Cup, Will and Charlie's AFL podcast. I'll put a little grab from that in here because it was a bit of fun as well.
I said to Mike, you can make it your big year of finals football. and the AFL turned it on, Mike. So let's cross to you, podcast Mike. What are your recollections and observations of the weekend in football?
Tigers are out. That's terrible for Tigers fans, and it was a huge game for them. Whoever they were playing played a better game on the day, to be honest. And
true.
Unfortunately, they're out of the finals, and it was a good year for them.
Mike, do you think it was a mistake to play an obviously underdone Dusty Martin?
No, I think it was the right decision for the day. I think he's one of the best players in the game, and he should be out there. Really, I also heard Geelong played a really risky game, which I'll let you guys explain in more detail.
Well, thanks for that.
I'm just giving the headlines up the top of the show here.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about the Bulldogs?
Great. I mean, they lost, but they played great. And it like you said, Will, it's games like that where you're just like, this is what footy's all about. And so you can't really complain in a game like that. That's what the game's all about. And it's games like that make you love the game.
Are we sure this is actually podcast Mike and not some AI algorithm that's just spitting out
This is so good. He's been on point. He hasn't said a word wrong so far, to be honest with you. He's absolutely nailed it.
Head to the YouTube and the TikTok and Insta and Twitter. Please follow me on all of those. That would be amazing. And the clips are going really well. Again, I'm going to be trying to do more clips. Patreon.com/Radio Mike, of course. Buy me a coffee, guys. Just jump on there. The overflow is going to be great. As I mentioned in that little mid-roll, I will be talking in the overflow about Frankie Muniz's filmography in more detail. So if you want a bit of fun, there's so many overflow episodes to binge, and I would love for you guys to be over on the Patreon, as I said. But guys, that is it for this week. I'll catch you next week. Thanks so much for everyone for coming back. The numbers on the downloads were the usual numbers, which implies that either everyone came back or some people left, but the same amount of people are new to the pod. If so, welcome. If not, welcome back. But yeah, and then leave a rating on Spotify for the pod and leave a review on Apple Podcast Reviews as well. That would really help out. And it's also just heartwarming for me to read them and makes me feel good. If you want to send me an email about how much you love the pod, that also makes me feel good. Thank you so much, guys. I'll catch you next week. My name's been Radio Mike. This has been The Inside of My Mind. See you later. Love ya. Sad the episode's over? Me too. So jump onto the Patreon for as little as $1 a month to get access to the TCB Overflow podcast now. It's just a little extra bit every week. And if you want to support the show, you can give as little as $1 a month. I'm over on the Patreon now, and it's overflowing with content. I'll see you there. Seriously, I'll see you there now, right? Because you're signing up, right? You are. Come on. I'll be your best friend. Thank you. This podcast was a Radio Mike original production. Head to radiomike.com.au to check out all our other content, stay up to date at radio.mike on Instagram, and get in touch, radiomikepod@gmail.com.